I thought I'd show how I put the clutch together. This is my R100RS. This is the diaphragm pressure spring, and I've coated the outside edge here where it touches the flywheel with a little bit of Moly 60 and just a dab here on the fingers. Now that goes inside right there in the housing up against the back of the flywheel. And then this is the clutch pack with the pressure plate and the top plate and the clutch disc. And I put a little index mark on the pressure plate and the top plate, which is exactly the way I got it from Southland Clutch. I assume that they balanced it, so I want to keep the parts in the same orientation. Now the trick I like to use, because you're trying to hold lots of pieces together, is to use these little wood dowels and put them in on every other hole, and that way I can hang the pack on the pins, which helps keep things in place while I put everything together with the screws. There. Now I use the CycleWorks extractor bolts because they're longer, and I can get them to go in with the diaphragm spring fully extended. The standard clutch bolts are too short, so this is a nice trick to kind of get everything started. So I thread these in by hand and try to make sure I get some good thread contact on them, sort of finger tight all the way around, and I can take my pegs out. Now the other thing that we need to get centered is the clutch disc right here. So I'm going to back these out just a little bit so I can move it a little. And I'm kind of eyeballing it initially so that it's about centered. But what I'm going to use is the transmission and use the input shaft to get everything aligned. These are some nice little extended bolts from CycleWorks that you can use for orienting the transmission. So I'm going to run these in so I can hang the transmission and make sure it's connected the same way it would be when the regular mounting bolts are used. And then this is the spline, which I want to use to get that clutch plate centered. So I slide this in a little until I can get the transmission to slide in. And it's doing it. I think what I need to do actually is I'm going to pull this one out so I've got a little bit more clearance and just use the top two to slide the transmission on, but I think I'm there. Yes. Okay. So the good news is that means the clutch plate is centered, and I'll be able to just slide the transmission on. So I've got that all aligned, and what I can do now is just start to tighten up all of these bolts more or less uniformly. And what I'm doing is taking the pressure, putting pressure on that diaphragm spring so it'll compress, and then I can get the standard clutch bolts into the pack. And I'm going to back this out a little bit, and let's see how good we are with the clutch bolts. See if I can get them to engage. Just a couple of threads on that one. No, not quite. So we're going to need to go a few more turns. Yeah, they're starting to engage. This one's a little better. The other two down here aren't. So I'm going to bring the pack a little tighter at the bottom. There we go. Still got to keep tightening here for that one. Let's see if I can get some threads on it. Yeah, there it goes. Now I want to make sure that the clutch bolts are in far enough, so I'm going to give it maybe a couple of turns more, because then I want to take out the long bolts, but I want to make sure I have enough threads engaged that they can hold, the standard clutch bolts can hold. And I'm also going to just take out one of these at a time so that there's always 5 bolts engaged. That way I don't have any unpleasant surprises. And that's the last one. Now I'll just tighten these up until they won't go any further, and then there's a torque setting for them, which is, I believe, 17 foot-pounds. So it's just a process of, I like to sort of do this crosswise, sort of take the slack up on the pressure plate more or less uniformly. Now all of the pack bolts are tight, so it's time to torque these. They don't get a very high torque, only about, I think it's 17 foot-pounds. So the problem is that this whole assembly, the flywheel and everything, wants to turn. What I've done is I'll take my screwdriver and run it through the flywheel teeth. There's not enough pressure to do any damage to the teeth. And then I've got my torque wrench set to 17 foot-pounds, and I can just tighten it up. And I'll just go around to make sure everybody's still snug. There we go. So, clutch is installed.